Hi, I'm Alex,
Hi, I'm Liz.
Hi, I'm Annie.
and welcome to the Research Room, a space to make research by the people for the people.
Perfect synergy.
And today we're going to be talking about another article dealing with stress and coping, but this time with a little bit more on the physical side of things, actual physical health. So this paper was titled "The Association Between Perceived Stress and Hypertension Among Asian Americans. Does Social Support and Social Network Make a Difference?" This was by Liu and her colleagues back in 2019, so not too long ago. And I think really one of the first kind of studies like that I've seen like this. So what was this? This was looking at stress and hypertension, basically. There's well-documented paths in dealing with stress and hypertension. So people that are more stressed are more likely to have hypertension for various reasons, things like higher blood pressure, increased heart rate, things like that, that just end up leading to hypertension, which then would lead to things like cardiovascular disease. So like these pretty intense sort of diseases that we can have. So this article decided to look at specifically Asians and seeing their specific risk for hypertension due to stress, and if things can help with that. So not just like individual things, but looking at now their social support networks. Are they receiving social support, and who is the social support from? Do they feel like they are actually integrated into the social networks? And so what they ended up finding here is that hypertension does definitely increase. The chances of hypertension does increase depending on how stressed you are. So the more stressed you are, the more likely you are to have hypertension. So that's great. I mean, great in the sense of, yay, they found the finding that they should have found. But there's a few things that happen with this, which is so they looked at three specific Asian subgroups. They had Chinese individuals, they had Korean individuals, and they had Vietnamese individuals. And they only ended up finding this effect for Chinese individuals. And then as far as the social support stuff goes, this only mattered in the case of Chinese individuals as well. Social support and the social network did not actually end up predicting more or less hypertension when it came to Korean and Vietnamese individuals. So there's lots to unpack there, I think, as far as like why why would that ever happen? That social support only mattered for one specific subgroup. And I think there's so much to say there. So I think let me open the floor a little bit on like what did you like about this paper?
Well, personally, I definitely liked it that it focused on Asian population, which I definitely think is kind of underrepresented in psychological research and in general as well. And it was very informative. I didn't even know Asians suffer from higher risk of hypertension. So it was great. And there are other, theoretical part where, they try to test different theories about like how social support could affect, physical health. And that itself, I think is, all, strengths of the paper. But of course, we have questions as always.
Yeah, and I like how they're looking at, social networks and like how integrated people are, because that's a good thing to like index and try to figure out like where people actually who's their social network comprised of. But I don't know, with this measure though, they're looking at like four different categories, I believe. So it's like if you're married or not, if you have like if you're part of a community group, a church group. So I'm wondering, just by virtue of like the way they have this measure set up, maybe some people won't come across as like socially integrated when in fact they really are. So and
Yeah.
among the different types too, like that could maybe differ, for
Mhm.
Chinese versus Koreans, things like that.
Yeah. I definitely agree with Liz. So, I mean, adding to the strength that I mentioned about this paper, which was, shedding light to a different population that's currently not discussed so much in psychological research. But then I wish they would have done a better job at considering really, culturally relevant, variables in their study. Just like you said, Liz, for example, social network, like social network for Asian Americans, look very differently across subgroups and eh, even, relative to non, Asian Americans. For example, their social networks and, social support tend to be surrounded around, the same subgroups of like Asians, in the sense that, for example, Koreans, they generally feel more comfortable building networks and like being around other Koreans, even though, they live in the US. So these things, subtle differences across subgroups about like what social network means and who they, primarily build their social networks with, these kind of dynamics weren't really captured in their measure, nor, in their analysis. So I definitely, as a Korean, I definitely wanted to kind of see more of that in the paper, but then that was one lacking thing. So, but it's interesting to think about these things though, and how considering these could have affected the results. What do you both think?
Yeah. So I'm thinking like that could have been such an easy thing to add, right? Like just
Mm,
one simple question of like, who was this? Was this was someone of the same ethnicity or someone of a different ethnicity? Like
yeah,
that could have been it, right? And it wouldn't make the process like too much more burdensome for the participant, and also not for the researcher either, right? Like that's a very simple thing to add to an analysis. So yeah, and it would have been so helpful because of the points that you're saying, right? Like it's just maybe it's a little bit easier to talk to someone of the same background, and like that kind of work is also like pretty well documented. That like if you want support for culturally specific things, like you are more likely to go to someone who is also from your background, whether that is ethnicity, whether that is like maybe it's sexual orientation. It could be for a whole bunch of different things, but like you want to be able to talk to someone who has like that similar experience, so that
mm,
like when they give advice, it doesn't come across as like, oh, like you're wrong for like just being who you are. Like you can, that there's already like that shared like background there.
yeah, and it is particularly true in this paper because I think their participants were foreign-born Asian Americans. So, there is already this language barrier, and that definitely affects like, who they build their social networks with. So, um, yeah, I think it is a very important missing piece. And yes.
I'm also wondering too, like when
And
people self-report for the study, as to like their racial identity, I wonder
mm,
because in this study they had like a translator for somebody there, I believe. So I'm wondering
Mm,
like how that actually makes them feel, right, in terms of their racial identity. Like, does that become more salient, like being there
yeah.
in the moment?
Oh, that's a really good point. I even haven't thought about that. Like the study procedure itself could, make their racial and ethnic identity even more salient. Oh, I think it could be possible, the way it was implemented, but what do you think, Alex?
so I'm kind of wondering with Liz's point, do you know, Liz, because I can't remember off the top of my head, but do you know if they matched, like, was the researcher the same ethnicity as
I
the
don't
participant?
I don't think
Hmm.
they
Mm,
mentioned that in the paper.
Okay.
yeah,
So that would be interesting though, to like
yeah.
know if that actually happened.
I
Right.
mean,
Because like, yeah.
just looking
Oh,
at
God.
the authors, they are quite like diverse in terms of ethnicity. So it could have
Mhm.
been, but they don't explicitly mention that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, these authors, who knows if they actually ran any of the participants? They could have just written up the paper. Um, But so yeah, I mean, definitely that like mismatch could bring about some things, right? Like maybe they were literally just even more stressed, like having to sit there like with somebody that's like interpreting for them and like isn't necessarily like you have to now interact with somebody else who like doesn't understand you, and it's like so many things open up there. So yeah, great point. Like, and I also just I didn't consider how important that might be for this kind of study, right?
Random thoughts, you know.
No, but it's important. And I totally missed that. Yeah.
So then with Annie's like earlier point, I'm also wondering like, and this is something that like just clicked in my head. So maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but the idea of your social network, right? That is also very like ethnically specific, right? So like who might comprise that even, and like the way that they measured these things, like yeah, they capped some of these instances of social support. So what I mean by that is usually you could like sorry, maybe there's too many details here, but let me hopefully this is not too much. So what they did was in this study they used a measure called the social network index, and that is it's widely used, and it's great for a lot of things in the sense of like you get an actual sense of like who are these people in their social support network, and as long as like you are actually like talking to them on a regular enough basis, like yeah, they should be considered in your social network. So they have things like who you're married to, if you are married, how many friends you have, how many family members you have that you talk to often enough. The list goes on from that. And so what they ended up doing here was they distilled that into how integrated you are into that network. So it's not necessarily just how many people, but like, oh no, actually no, it really is just how many people, but how many, they only allowed a certain number of people, which I think is like the limitation in the sense of usually in the scale, it's like from 1 to 7, I think, for any of these groups, with the exception of like who you're married to. Of course, that can only be one person legally in a lot of places. But that's also the cultural differences that should be explored in other studies. But when it comes to the social network index, yeah, you could score quite a bit higher than what they allowed for. So they only allowed up to 2 for friends, only 2 for family, and so that's kind of what I mean by like who your social network is also driven by ethnicity, and maybe you just have more family members, and that would weigh more in this kind of case.
Or maybe it's
yeah,
just better
especially like
quality too. Like your better quality connections are from the people who are from your like ethnic group.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that also brings up another point of like what dimension of social support like should we really be caring about? And I think it would be nice if the study was able to like rule out like is it just the literal number of people versus like the actual like quality of support? Because like one supportive person could outweigh 100 non-supportive people, but like maybe you end up talking to them, right? Like who cares?
This is
So yeah, I mean that's
strikingly, yeah. I mean, I was just thinking that this
go
is
ahead.
strikingly similar to the discussion we had last week. It was like, oh, you measure social support with this one scale and that's it. Like, but you know, like we're discussing now, there are so many different aspects about social support. They're qualitatively different. And also there are different types of social support. Like we mentioned last week, it could be informational, you know, it could be more like resource focused, it could be emotional focused. So I think there is like a concurrent theme that kind of needs to be addressed in future work. You know, people need to care about different types of social support, and you know, if we're going to continue, you know, thinking about social support as this like one-dimensional thing, you know, like there's really limitations to what we can learn about the effects of social support, right? I got
Even
a
in
bit
today's
excited
world,
there.
even in today's world though, I mean, like think about the pandemic. If somebody did this research now, right, social support would greatly differ, right, in terms of like video interactions, all of that. So
Yeah,
you have to consider the context.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I think especially also like that long discussion of like what's better? Like, are you allowed to like have support like from this like technological like sort of sense, or like does it
Mm,
have to be in person? And
yeah,
like that would change so much, right?
yeah.
I'm just kind of like thinking like this is definitely a running theme when it comes to any social support like study. It's maybe I'll just go ahead and say it. Like, it's not. Dang it! How do I say this? Because I don't want to just say like they're not good, but like they always have room for improvement.
Mm.
And like myself included, right? Like you, like I've done social support studies, and like I've only like included a certain like subset of scales. Like I don't include every single thing and like try to rule out everything. Like it does get difficult to do that, and like there's so many different measures, there's so many different types of support. Like, should you really be like loading that onto participants? And like theoretically, like do all these matter? So I don't know. There are considerations, but like I think we always end up walking away from these studies just being like, I want more information though. Um,
I guess it's
and
time
so
that somebody develop a better social support measure. That's what it seems like.
Please
right.
go ahead, you two. I'll be patiently
Annie,
waiting for this
Annie, I
improved
think you
scale.
would make the best scale, so the job's on you.
We'll
But
see.
yeah, no, I mean, I'm trying to think like how long has this field been doing research? Like it's probably been
Oh,
probably about 70 years now. And so like maybe other scientists would look at that and like that's not that long, but like 70 years is a good amount of time to like make a really
mm.
good measure, I think. Um, but we haven't quite
Yeah, I mean,
figured it
I
out.
wonder if things have changed, if any, like since the pandemic. Just like Liz
Mm,
said, we now know, there are so many different kinds of social support we can get with limited
mm,
amount of physical contact.
right.
So, maybe researchers during the pandemic have come up with different ways of measuring social support. And yeah, I'm interested to find relevant papers on this, but we'll see if there are any
Mm,
improvements on our conceptualization of social support since the pandemic.
mhm.
But that'll be interesting though.
Yeah, and I think that also like that does bring up the point of again the emphasis on like who's in your immediate circle. Like if you if you aren't living with the people that are giving you social support, like are you getting social support? Like, and again, that's probably family or like maybe very close friends or something.
Mm.
And like if that is capped with like how many points you're allowed to get on this scale, like again, that's like such a limitation.
Maybe the
Um,
most supportive people that you come across, like you don't see them, so you're not in like physical proximity, and maybe you don't
mm,
even talk that often, like some of the best friendships, right? You don't see
Mm,
that person for a long time, but you still, when you do pick up, you like pick up where you left off. So
exactly. Yeah,
mhm.
I agree with this. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's every friend that I have. I talk to them once a year. We set up an annual meeting and we catch up.
an annual meeting. That's great.
But like those are my best friends. Like
Yeah.
I don't necessarily talk to my best friends every day. Um, so yeah, great point there. So then so there's a lot more that we can talk about with this. But I am kind of curious. Do you have any reasons for like why we only find these effects for Chinese individuals and like why not for the other two subgroups?
Oh, I have a very simple answer, which might be
Mm,
inaccurate. Like, I don't know, as a nation, like my intuitive was that, oh, the Chinese community is usually large, relatively larger than any other Asian communities anywhere in the US. So, given that, I was thinking, Chinese, ended up having more resources, like social resources, because they have more
mm,
access to other Chinese compared to Koreans and Vietnamese. I mean, that's like one immediate observable explanation that I had. Um, and I think Liz mentioned this before, but like the way people build social networks can also differ across different subgroups, even among Asians. So that is an interesting possibility. I mean, I can definitely talk about social networks of Koreans, but I have no idea what social networks look like for Chinese and Vietnamese. So I can't really, make a definite, like, I guess, like informative guess about this. But if you have any other other thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah. So I have some thoughts, but Liz first, do you have any?
I don't really have too many thoughts, and I can't really speak to it because I don't have any experience with it. So take it away, Alex.
Okay. So I'm sort of like along the lines of what Annie was saying, like just Chinese history in America it's a lot longer, right? So like they've been here and depending on why they had to come is it's not a great history, but like historically though they have been here longer in America. So I'm also wondering just like yes, these were all foreign born and they ended up immigrating, but like um, even if that is the case, let's say if you are Chinese, potentially just like the probability that you know someone here already, that like maybe you have family here already because like they've been here for multiple generations as opposed to like other Asian subgroups. I wonder if like that's also like maybe just get different social support because of that. Like maybe get this more like westernized version of social support, like whatever that actually means. Which like we need to do more studies on like what that might mean. But like I imagine it would be a little bit different, right? Like just the kinds of things that are brought up. I know there's a little bit on like it's more emotionally driven, like compared relative at least to like Asian support, which doesn't necessarily ever involve emotions. And sometimes well, I think this is something that I brought up last time as well, that like sometimes just bringing up emotions like that is very distressing itself, right? And like especially if you're not used to talking about your emotions, like that only makes things worse until you can figure out like how to have those conversations. So yeah, I mean, I wonder if like that does happen here as well, that like the type of social support like just also matches the type of measurement that also happened, that like was more of a Western like social support kind of measure. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Related to that though too, it's like I wonder with these measures if they've actually like validated them like in different cultures, right? Like are these measures that are just used on like white people? Like I don't really know. So I feel like that's something else like we need to know. Like are these like measures that we're using in these studies, like are they validated with different demographic groups, cultural groups, all of that?
Yeah.
For the most part, no. They're definitely used, but like they haven't been like specifically tested to see like are we actually getting at social support in the way that we think that we are, right? So short answer is no. But I mean, who knows? I mean, potentially social support is more similar than different, right? And maybe we don't need to harp on this point, but like I mean, internally, I kind of feel like we do, because I mean, I don't know. I also am not like I'm a first generation American, right? So like I have other differences compared to people that have been here for 3, 4, 5, 6 generations, right? Um, yeah, I think there's a lot to uncover there.
Yeah, but this paper is a good start, I would say, to just starting the dialogue. And I think one strength also of this paper is that like given now we've learned about this finding that even the relationship between like stress, social support, and hypertension, that's been studied for quite a while, but if you look at a different population, they look differently, and they are informative in that unique way. So this kind of, to me, it kind of opens up questions about subgroups of like other ethnicities, like African Americans and Hispanic Americans. Like we tend to think of them as like one category too, just like we think of Asian Americans, but I'm sure they have all different subgroups as well, and I don't think that's quite represented in like research either. So just the fact that it opens up my perspective, I think that was also one strength of the paper.
I think that's a recurring theme that we talk about each week, on the podcast, is that, that's what happens with research is we're so used to like researching the norm, that it seems like, so we say that these are strengths because we're like, oh, they're actually researching a different group, and it is a strength, but we need to do more of that work to like really understand like different subgroups and all of that.
True.
Yes, there's so many things that go into that, right? Like just the idea that we can lump together so many different types of people, and that we've been doing that. Like, so, like, of course, like it's probably better than nothing. But like also it leads you like in false directions, right? Like if you suddenly think that like, oh, all Asians, anything, right? Like you can complete that sentence. Like that does not seem like the right answer to anything.
Oh.
Um, so yeah, like we definitely need to get out of that mindset. But it's so much easier, of course, on the researcher side. Like, oh, you check a box. I put this into the analysis. It's one factor. Makes it so much easier compared to like having 10, 20 different types of people from Asia like that. Of course, it gets a lot more complicated that way. But like, I think this is maybe Liz's line, but I'll go ahead and say it. It's
You
no
can.
excuse, right?
That is definitely my that is my line every week.
um, right. So I think it's a great point that and not just for Asians, right? Like across the board for any person of color, like they are not just suddenly lumped into other people that might look similar because like the cultural backgrounds are different, the traditions are different, the way that the everyday life just like operates can be very different. So yes, that is my long way of saying I agree.
I appreciate that.
We all do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, I'm also just now thinking like, I mean, even within like Indians, right? Like, I could think of like within India itself, like there's so many different types of Indians and so many different like, I mean, languages, so many different types of again like cultures, traditions, foods, which like if we're talking about hypertension, like if that will absolutely make a difference, right? So, yeah, like you can't even like lump it that way. So many things there. So then I'm wondering if there are any other questions before we wrap this up.
Maybe
Yeah,
some the last comments, summarizing the paper. I don't have any, but I'm basically asking you to if you have any. Well, I'll think about something.
Well, I mean, kind of the point that we were just talking about, I think that is like the main message here is that like, yeah, the topic itself is great. Like it's important, stress, hypertension, social support, anything that like might mitigate the factors that lead to hypertension, cardiovascular disease, anything like that. Like, of course, super important stuff. But like even more important is not just lumping together all people. It's not just about like, it's not an American thing. It's there's plenty of different types of people like within America. There's plenty of different like age groups and like different ethnic backgrounds, also gender, which like we didn't even talk about, but like I mean it's primarily within men, right? And this study also found that, but it's a secondary point, I think, compared to like the ethnicity sort of thing, which like that has like little to no like actual research.
Agreed.
Yeah.
No, that was just a perfect summary. Like I had nothing to add, really.
Neither do I. So
Well, thank you. All right, so then we're gonna continue with stress and coping, and like there's so many things here still that we need to talk about. I wonder, like, should we keep talking about social support, or should we try to get to some other things? So, like, there's plenty of other like individual things that go on with this. Like, we have taken the turn into social life, but like, I don't know. We'll find out next week what happens.
We'll need to do
we'll definitely
some
pick a
research.
good paper. It will be an interesting topic for sure.
Yes. All right. So then we, aside from the podcast, we still have the visual abstracts, we have the write-ups, we have videos, and more coming up as we continue just trying to disseminate this psychological research to everyone on our website, which is roomforresearch.com, as well as on social media, which is at Room for Research. You can find us in either of those locations through our name. And I think that's it.
Well, thanks
Thank
for
you,
listening.
everyone. Bye.
Yes. Bye for now.
Bye.
With the sun breeze.